Welcome to ABA on Tap. I'm Mike Rubio with Dan Lowry. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and always analyze responsibly. All right. Welcome back to yet another installment of ABA on Tap. I am your ever grateful co-host, Mike Rubio, along with Mr. Dan Lowry. Mr. Dan, happy Saturday to you.
Happy Saturday, making some football adjustments, but
Football adjustments, tried and true. We got to be honest about it. Today's going to be fun and easy, man. This is the second time around for this guest. We had to have him back on just because the first time he was on, it was incredibly fun. I'm not going to waste any more of our time. We've got Dr. Scott O'Donnell. All right, Dr. Scott, good to see you, sir.
Making my way over to the couch right now. Yep. Hey, good to be here, guys.
Let me give you your coffee
guys. I'm
mug.
Back.
Yeah, your coffee mug.
Yeah, I got my coffee mug.
You probably have some bourbon
really,
in there.
Really
it's cold.
Yeah. Bourbon is kind of interesting, by the way, Mike. I thought bourbon was all strong, but I was looking at alcohol content. I don't really know much about bourbon, but I know you like bourbon.
I do.
Right. So
almost too much, I would say.
I thought it was high alcohol content, but it's not. It's like more like closer to wine or whatever.
So let me see. It's pretty standard 80 proof, 40%.
Oh, is it?
I would say.
Maybe.
Now there might be some boutique stuff, or bourbon has gotten pretty popular. It's come back. I think it went away for a little while. So there are some things that are now bourbon style whiskeys that are finished differently. Maybe liqueurs. Yeah. So there's bourbon cream liqueurs out there. Okay. But yeah, it starts about 80 proof, and then you can get into some pretty high proof stuff, which is usually what I enjoy. So you've got your full proof or your barrel proof, and so you're looking at like 114, and then sometimes as high as like 131. So yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. I do enjoy it. That's what we were talking about COVID earlier. I don't know how far we want to get into that, but that was right at the beginning. That was my thing. I was like, I'm just gonna sip some high proof bourbon since we've got things building up right around here. Maybe that'll help. I can't say it did, but I enjoyed the bourbon. So.
No, yeah, I'm a fan of this really sweet liquor that's made right in Philadelphia. Is blackberry brandy, and it's just popular around here. And I had a client who lived right near the factory, and I would park there because I was doing home service, and I would be parking under this vat, right? And I look up at the vat, and I don't know what's in these vats, but I'm thinking, and there's like 4, 5, 6 vats, and I'm thinking that one of those vats has got to have some blackberry brandy. And if there was a big industrial accident, like that would probably not be a bad way to go, where this thing just bursts on top of you. And
he's stoked in brandy liqueur. I've been getting you mentioned blackberry. I've been getting into bourbon infusions. Yeah, I mean, they're usually better in my experience with the clear spirits, but I like bourbon. So, but I happened upon over the holidays, I did a green apple vanilla bean infusion, and that was pretty fun. Everybody enjoyed it. Tried some orange peel, goes too far orange. And then right now I've got sitting waiting for me, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow during a game. I did a cherry blackberry vanilla bean. And it just turned like this nice red color, almost like wine, and I'm pretty excited about that. Anyway, we're boring the hell out of Dan.
No, it's all good. I think that's a great. You come home smelling like a lot of brandy or a lot of alcohol. Sorry, honey, I just had an industrial accident.
At a client's house.
I swear I was working and not going to the bar.
Yeah, right. I got to thank you guys because my ride has gotten a little bit longer to work, and it's great having you in the car, and something to listen to. And like, yeah, I do like to listen to sports talk, but I'm a behavior analyst, so I really like listening to you guys too. And you had some really terrific guests on. You had Nicole Parks, who's a friend of mine, and she's an OBMer. She's really into forensic ABA. and stuff like that, and has some group, and she's part of SIBA. So last time we talked,
Cool.
the group didn't have a name. Now it's the Society for the Expansion of Behavior Analysis,
Beautiful.
and things have certainly progressed. Like spent hours and hours the other night working through the IRS paperwork and stuff like that, preparing things, so I'm at that part of it, but this is something I've done before. It's just a matter of like, you go back and forth a few times, and then like they give you the thumbs up. So
if
we're
you
at
need
that
a good
part of it.
CPA, my buddy, really good CPA. If you need anything, let me know.
Oh, cool. Good to know. Good to know. I appreciate that. Yeah, right now our bank account is zero because we just started it the last week. But like, things are coming together, and we're like making this into a real nonprofit. It's going to be 501c6, which is a business league, kind of like the NFL is a 501c6 also. But so we're specifically for our expanding that business outside of behavior analysis.
That's fantastic.
Which is pretty cool. And all right, and you had Rachel Benson on, which I thought was really interesting when she's talking about teaching teenagers how to masturbate, right? That was like super interesting. What an episode.
We have to have her back
And then
on.
I was thinking this morning, and I was like, you really could use behavior analysis there. And you can measure duration, you can measure intensity, you can measure all kinds of things. I don't think this is the kind where you want an observer. Like, this is probably like we have them measure, but I was thinking how interesting of an application that was. And I've been having some crazy applications too. I have had a client recently, and she is training to be a circus performer. And I'm doing we created this intervention and this activity schedule. She's going by and it's working really well. And we had to make an adjustment to one of the programs, sword swallowing, right? And we're looking at the different things that she does in preparing for the circus, and we're looking at mastery versus fluency techniques for these and how to best do them. But sword swallowing isn't something that you want to do to a fluency approach. You're not trying to do it as many times as you can per minute. It is something that like you can only do. You could do it several times a day, right? But you have to do it at certain times. You can't. I'm learning all this. I'm not a sword swallower, obviously. I'm a behavior analyst, but like I'm helping her the way I know. But she's telling me like, oh yeah, I got to do it a couple hours after I eat. Otherwise, it'll be like food on the sword. So I'm like putting it down in my stomach. And we made an adjustment to her program because we felt like the mastery approach in the morning, where she was going to do it 3 times in a row in the morning, we felt that wasn't enough in keeping her skills up. So we went to twice a day and 5 times in the morning, 5 times at night. So it takes her about for the 3 times, it takes her about 13 minutes to swallow the sword 3 times. So it'll probably take her a little bit longer, but this is something she's really into. She was so excited to have like this way to organize it and way to track her progress, where she could see like if she's getting better and getting worse, right? But I don't know anyone else who's applied behavior analysis to sword swallowing, and if you guys do, let me know. But
that is an eclectic, interesting example. I love it. I love hearing the examples outside of the traditional. And I imagine, circus performers tend to not run oftentimes in the same circles as ABA. So it's cool when they can collaborate and find uses for both.
Yeah. How did she found you, I assume?
No, this was a clinical client, and
okay.
Someone who has ADHD, and that's why I'm able to help them. And then, when you hear something like this and you're like, wow, that sounds really cool. And like, she's dead serious about it and is going to a school for it and everything. And it like super aligns with her values, right? So this is like something, as soon as she started talking about like all the reasons, that she likes it, I'm like, all right, this is a no brainer. But the funny thing is, there's probably people who are telling her, what do you want to do that for? Kind of talking her out of it. And, here I am like, oh, I'm your new therapist. Oh, you want to be a circus performer? Let's do it. Just pushing her straight into it. Like, no, you're not just going to be any circus performer. You're going to be the best. You're going to be the best circus performer.
That's super cool in the sense, and I hope I can explain this right, but the idea here is that this relationship may have started, as you were saying, from a clinical perspective with, certain labels, certain symptoms attached to those labels that traditionally people would have said, that's what you'll be responding to. But what you're doing is you're building up other behaviors that then might replace, to use that loosely, might
Oh yeah,
actually then
yeah.
improve overall. So it's not the purpose she may have come to you initially, but as you understood her values and her strengths, it was like, hey, we can explore this, and this will just kind of improve you overall, and that should help in the general sense as well as clinically.
Yeah, well, a lot of times with ADHD, you're dealing with procrastination. I'm not able to start a task. I'm not able to do a task, and stuff like that. And the funny thing is, like, I mean, what intervention did I use? Activity schedule. How many activity schedules have you guys done? I mean, I'm sure you've done tons and tons of them. So it's not like all that different. It's just, yeah, I'm just using it with someone different, a different person, and
Right.
I'm not using it on them. I'm using it with them. We create it together, and that really does help her get into it. Like she definitely is into it, and she's super excited to be doing behavior science with it.
Have you been able to learn a little bit about the what's involved in sword swallowing in terms of, I mean, there's got to be a lot of internal prep. She's manipulating, managing a lot of musculature,
Hmm.
in a sense. What have you learned about that? I mean, I have no
Yeah,
idea what that consists of.
yeah, this is really interesting. And I'm glad we're talking about this because, the BACB is very much about like, oh, before you practice in another area with a different population
Yeah.
with different behaviors, you have
Yeah.
to find like, you have to get supervision, you have to get education in that area and stuff like that. And my thing is like, no, I have my methods, and as long as good with my methods, I can apply it to all different areas. And I knew that like I wasn't going to waste time trying to find a supervisor to teach me how to, or like someone who does behavior analysis with the circus performers. So I just asked her, and like instead of like having to rely on supervisor or someone to teach me that, I just said, what is involved with? Tell me a little bit more about your source following, so because that's kind of important. Is this something you could do to a fluency? Is it something you have to use a mastery
Mhm.
approach to? And like, yeah, it's something you really have to use a mastery approach to because you could hurt yourself if you're, trying to do it really fast. And if you're
Right.
doing it if you're doing it repetitive a lot over and over and over again, then yeah, you could cause damage. One of the more interesting things is she told me about, and this is funny because like, I always subscribe to the code. In fact, I teach ethics, uh, the ethical code. So, but she was like, yeah, when I get to the point where I'm pushing the sword past my heart, right? I get a little freaked out because I could feel my heart beating on the sword, right? And I'm like, that makes perfect sense because it's like right next to it. And she says I could go down a little bit further, but like the way I do it, it's not as far down, but it looks really cool. It looks like it's really far down, and I want some super someone who really knew what they were doing to be there with me. I'm like, yeah, I agree with you. I think that if you do push yourself further, then you want to have someone who's like really experienced in it, who wants to
Mhm.
be there like for you. So I'm encouraging her to get supervision, education and supervision on it before she pushes herself further. But things are working really well with that client. Kind of
Amazing.
happy. You had I want to go back to a couple other people you had
Hang on,
on
just real
because
quick. I have a question for you on that, Dr.
oh
Scott.
sure.
So, how do you start? Do you just get gradually bigger and bigger swords? Like, is there a lot of pain in the beginning of like, are you, oh, that's too far left or too far right? Like, how do you shape
Oh,
that skill or how is that skill learned?
it's all technique, I think, and there's certain things I would imagine you go down like a list that's somewhat like a
Mhm.
task analysis. You have to do this first, do this second, and then and you are making room. I think a lot of it, like we're we're probably all really capable of it. We have to learn to get the voice box out of the way and move a couple, make sure that our throat's set up right.
Amazing.
But no one, none of us are going to try. That's the thing. Like, we're not going to get close to finding out if we can swallow swords because none of us in our rightful minds are going to stick a sword down our throat. But if someone who said like, oh, you could do this, and I'll show you how, and I'm with you, and I'll show you the steps. I'm sure that's how she learned. In fact, that's what she told me. People have
Okay.
shown her how to do it and shown her the technique. So it's a lot of technique, making sure your throat is a certain way and moving certain structures around, as that sword comes down and making sure you're not going to poke a hole in your heart, I think.
That's amazing. A couple things, and then we'll get back to you there. But yeah, the ethics portion you were commenting on. We I recently started working with a child who became blind, and certainly out of my content expertise. So anybody out there listening who might want to offer me a hand, we're glad to entertain it and get some help. It's going well. I like the way you put it. It's really me going in with, being entrusted by his family to do so, and just kind of looking around the environment and saying, talk to me. So this is a challenge. Okay, let's think about this. Let's task analyze this. Let's see what we're going to do. What behaviors might make sense? What's within his reach? It's been an interesting. We kick around the phrase collaborative treatment all the time, and then there's a situation like this where I went to this kid's IEP and I was like, I'm listening to everybody really closely. I'm taking extensive notes because a lot of what I can help him do is get better at the things that those people who have content expertise need him to do better. So, from there, I feel like I'm within the guidelines of ethical practice. And then certainly if anybody out there is listening and wants to lend me a hand, let us know. And then I guess selective mutism was the other one that came up recently with one of our staff, part of our team who's looking at that and taking on a client. And, she was asking about the ethics. And I said, I feel confident that as long as we are systematic about our approach, we can do this and get the feedback from the family and sort of gauge the progress. And then, yes, we will continue looking for somebody to give us more guidance who has more experience because I'm sure they're out there. Now, for your client, I don't know, maybe David Blaine. I don't know if he's board certified, but that might be the guy to be able. That guy swallows like light bulbs or something. Do I remember that?
Probably.
Oh yeah, he does all kinds of crazy things.
He does crazy stuff. Anyway, I'm going to kick it back to you. You've got a lot of good stuff for us. So you were going to segue into something else.
Yeah, I was going to talk about Megan DeLeon Miller. You had her on too, and you guys were talking about. Yeah, you're talking about, and she's been in some SIBA meetings too. So several of these people that you've had have contributed, and you guys were talking about instructional control. Yeah. And it makes me think of the EAB research, and it makes me think of like the CyberRat preparation, which is CyberRat is a program that my EAB students are using. It's like a simulated rat, so we don't have to get the real rats and the Skinner boxes. We could just do the simulation now, and it's cool. Pretty good. But I was thinking of the first couple sessions, what you did the first couple sessions, right? And I was thinking about pairing. And you guys often talk about how things are lost, when you go from the lab to the living room. And I just want to go over this and see what you guys think of it. All right.
Thank you.
So the first session is apparatus habituation, where you just put the rat in the box and you just watch it. You're not doing anything. You're not giving anything. You're just sitting there watching the animal, and the animal is getting used to the box and getting used to you watching it, in the box. And then the second session is magazine training on a VT90 schedule reinforcement. So it's a variable time. It's not a contingent schedule. And it's just variable time delivery of reinforcement. And they'll deliver like 12 to 14 reinforcers without there being any contingent like responses required. And we find this to be like, really necessary. This is part of our process in preparing an animal in the laboratory. But I know we talk about like pairing and building rapport and stuff like that with clients initially, but we never really look at it like that. We never really look at it like, I'm just going to come and I'm going to observe and I'm going to sit around here and I'm going to watch, and you're just going to get used to me being around you without me asking you to do anything or without me giving you anything or anything like that. And then after you're used to me, I'm just going to deliver reinforcement. Non-contingently, I'm going to give you this reward where this reinforcing stimulus, and I'm just going to deliver it to you, multiple times, a dozen times, and not even ask you to do anything, right? Just give it to you, and you're going to get used to me delivering reinforcement. And the funny thing is, this is kind of necessary. And I realized when I was working with a client why this is necessary, because the animal sometimes will be like surprised when the magazine pops up and there's food in there and might not eat from it right away. And it's kind of like, you can see like the surprise in the animal's face, but it's also like, oh, it's reinforcement and that's good. And I think about like a few times where I've had clients, young clients, and they might have autism or ODD or something like oppositional defiance disorder, right, or ADHD, or maybe a combination of the three, and them being in my office or being in the home. And just that first time when they're going to like receive contingent reinforcement, and it's almost like it surprises them, or they get blinded by it, for a second, like almost like it's oh, it's like too much, right? Like, and they don't like it, but then they start working for it. You know what I mean? And it's like, and I think like, well, maybe if I just got the client, just delivered reinforcers to the client, got him used to it first, we wouldn't have that. And that's really what we do in like the EAB in the lab. So I want to know what your guys' thoughts on that
I
was.
love it. I love it. I love the connections you made there, and I think that's so. It's trying to capture this nuance, and as you were describing it, I was thinking about it. But I think it determines that difference between making the organism, if you will, do something, and then truly motivating them to do something. The difference between a child, doing for extrinsic reinforcement versus the idea that we have a relationship, and there's all these things that are hard for us to measure. This idea of trust and even rapport is hard to measure. And it's like, you've gotten used to me here. You know that I'm harmless. And now, in fact, I actually have a great deal of value. And then now that you know that and you're coming close to me, now I can start being more adult directed and having you do these tasks that are more target specific, or, whatever it is the treatment plan might talk about. And I think part of it is we just have a lot of young professionals that, and we've talked about this too, that just don't get enough of that side of the training. I think that most of us, we want to deploy them out to do the service. So we end up sort of doing this quick version of, how to build a cheeseburger at McDonald's. And it's,
Mm-hmm.
you put the bread, you slide all this on, and that's going to be the same cheeseburger every time. And then they hit different customers, and that doesn't work. And then it's disheartening. And we end up using a lot more of the extrinsic motivators, or, whatever those things are, in a way that maybe starts losing value, isn't as well coordinated or related to the task they're doing. Again, those things that we talk about where I feel a lot of it gets lost. But I love what you just described, especially so you said the apparatus habituation and then just the non-contingent reinforcement.
Magazine training, yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's incredible. That's exactly right. I'm here. You have a reaction to me initially. If we're dealing with it with an actual rat, for example, and then all of a sudden, once you habituate to that, we're good. You're going to be in a different state of arousal, if you will, and maybe more prepared for this learning task. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm going to take that straight to the living room.
Well, that
Oh,
reminds me a
straight to
lot
the
of
living room.
like your reciprocal and contingent imitation process of how you wanted rapport to be
Yeah.
built with a lot of the clients, right? We're just going to come in and we're going to imitate them. We're not going to ask them to do anything, or
Yeah,
I
and
mean, that
that's
seems right up that alley.
yeah, so it's I do this I borrowed from various other people, but this idea of contingent imitation, we all, do the autism treatment, we're very used to the nonverbal imitation traditionally. So this idea is contingent imitation and then linguistic mapping, which I talk to a lot of SLPs about, and they look at me like they've never heard it. I swear I borrowed it from them. But it's what you're describing. So I come in, is I'm doing an assessment. I'm talking to the parent, and I'll tell the parent, I may not do much with your child today. I just need to sit and I need to talk with you. And my intent is to make you feel very comfortable, because if your child's referencing you at all, which I'm sure they are, that's going to be their first cue that I'm cool. I'm okay.
Mm.
You're getting used to me. And then if at the end, anytime they make any sort of, pay attention, or they make any sort of overture, or they look at something in my bag, sure, I'll engage, to which usually I get a little withdrawal. And then the second appointment is where I come in, and it's like, hey, I'm here to pay attention to you, which means I might imitate some of the things you're doing and see how you respond to that. Is that going to bother you? In which case you can tell me no, and then I can stop. And that's already building a relationship. Maybe I imitate you and then you imitate me, and then I change the action and you imitate something new. And now we're really cooking. And as I'm doing
Mm.
that, I'm kind of talking, trying not to be overly loquacious, but I'm talking about what you're doing, what I'm doing, what's happening in the environment. Oh, is it trash truck day? Oh, did you hear that? Oh, is there a helicopter overhead? Again, all of these things that just begin to build what I see as that true rapport and that pairing. We have
Mm.
a lot of terms for it, and I think most of it gets overly boiled down to, I just need to say something and then you do it. And sure, that's a fine way to describe it. And then I think what you and I are talking about involves so many other operations in terms of motivation. And I know, again, these things that now we can't measure: the comfort, trust, reciprocity, the idea that, yeah, we have a relationship, and you know that if I'm asking you to do something, it's likely going to give you access to something else. So, there's a lot to be explored there for sure.
I have a question for both of you gentlemen along the lines of what you're talking about. Well, one thought and one question. My thought is the term non-contingent reinforcement, loved the idea, loved the process, didn't love the term. And just coming back from when I would teach RBTs, the RBT task list, because we would initially go over reinforcement, and the three criterion for reinforcement would be that it would have to be contingent, it would have to be typically a consequence, and then increased behavior. And if those three things are satisfied, then it was reinforcement. And then I was like, well, except this one type of reinforcement that is actually non-contingent, not even necessarily delivered after a behavior. It does potentially increase behavior, but it's typically done to satiate behavior. So that term, concept, I love it, but maybe we can, if we just use a different term, it might make more sense. But that's my thought. My question to you all is, so this idea of the variable time reinforcement, obviously being delivered non-contingently, is it important on what that reinforcement is? So do we run the risk of being like transactional? I feel like that's something that's happened in, ABA, is that maybe the RBT or whatever, let's say we give the reinforcement every 20 minutes or whatever. If it's something completely extrinsic, then maybe the client sees the RBT as this person who comes and gives me things. And maybe that's a relationship, utilitarian theory. Maybe that fits into that. And the relationship is this person comes and gives me things, which is cool, better than nothing. Or does it matter if it's more somehow relational building outside of extrinsic? So maybe somehow because they observe that first session, they observe things that I'm doing, and they're now engaging and interacting in those things versus some sort of extrinsic tangible. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, gentlemen?
Just a
you
short
want to go
question
first?
from Dan.
Yeah, you want to go first?
Man, you covered a lot of ground there. So let's see the non-contingent part, I guess, and then you'll jump in here, Dr. Scott. But I guess when we define that is, if we're thinking about a rat, that is truly non-contingent, right? Mm-hmm. It could be the rat's just standing still, and the delivery of the reinforcement occurs. And then if I'm thinking about it, it goes more into the realm of differential reinforcement now, based on things that developmentally or socially I might see the child doing that I can try to provide reinforcement for, that I know that are developmentally and socially significant. So I am looking to differentially reinforce those things that might otherwise go unnoticed because the behaviors of concern are otherwise so overwhelming. So I think that fits your notion of that from that perspective. I don't know if you want to jump in there on that, Dr. Scott.
Well, I do. But just to tell you, Mike, you mentioned linguistic mapping. I suggest you check out Vincent Carbone.
Oh, yes.
He's a big verbal behavior guy. And I've seen some research they were doing where they were using relational frame theory to do like linguistic mapping. Mm-hmm. But it sounds fancy, but it's probably really close to what you're doing right now anyway. So
yeah, I love a lot of his CMOR, CMOT stuff. He's done some.
Oh yeah, we're gonna get into that a little bit today too.
Mike wears a tie when he does that, so he's fancy.
Like ketchup.
As for the NCR stuff, I tell my students this story, and I say, like, you're at the ATM and you press, and you're just there and you're pressing buttons, and you press 7 sevens, right? You hit the 7 button, right? And then $100 pops out, and you're like, oh, okay. So then you hit the 7 sevens again, and $100 pops out, and you're like, all right. So you start hitting sevens, right? And that money starts popping out, right? And then at one point you have to stop and you have to start picking up the money off the ground. So you're picking up the money off the ground, and then the $100 bill comes out. It keeps on coming out, right? And as the money keeps on coming out, you don't have to press that button anymore. But you're not leaving the ATM. You're not going anywhere. You're going to stand there. You're going to keep on receiving that $100. You're just not pressing the button anymore, right? And that's the way I see non-contingent reinforcement. Like that. It's important. You're delivering reinforcers in that context, right? And that's really important. And that's how we curtail like the emotions during extinction. That we're still delivering reinforcement in the context.
Sure.
But you're not leaving the ATM, you're still there. It's still your favorite. You love that ATM. It's your favorite ATM. In fact, you like it even more now that you don't even have to press the sevens. You could just stand there and get the $100.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of my
Yeah,
my contention
like
is
that.
literally just with the term. It's like the term punishment, right? Like we use the term punishment, and when I train it to people, they have an idea of what punishment is. Something aversive that somebody doesn't like. And then I have to take that idea and say, well, maybe, but in ABA, we define punishment as something provided after a behavior that decreases behavior. If we called punishment pink unicorn, I feel like that would make, or something, I don't know, something that some word that doesn't already have like a
Connotation.
preconceived notion,
Yeah.
then they would get it better. And that's just how I feel. Like the concept, I think, makes total sense. The premise, everything. I just the terminology, I think, gets me sometimes. I wish we could just have a different term for it. But anyway, I think the more important thing is the question of the extrinsic versus reinforcement with the variable time schedule in that situation. Do you think that it makes a big difference? Do we run the risk of being transactional, or was that kind of what you were using with your ATM analogy, Dr. Scott?
Yeah, ATM. I mean, like, yeah, if you're getting those 100-hour bills, you're not leaving. You like that ATM. How do you feel about that ATM now? They're spending out 100-hour bills. I felt good about it before when I had to hit the sevens. Now I feel even better. I don't even have to do anything. I just stand here and receive it.
True. Do we run the risk, though, of an ATM as a completely transactional device? Then is there a different dynamism in a relationship that we are trying to have with a potential client versus a transactional relationship of an ATM?
Well, I would say, well, what happens when it stops spitting out 100-hour bills?
Well, you're going to press the sevens again. That's kind of
You
what we
probably
want.
gonna press the sevens
And
again.
that's
I might
kind of what
press
we
the
want,
sevens
right?
again.
With that relationship, I guess, in that sense. So,
And then, I think if that didn't work, I might press 9 nines or
sure.
something like that. In fact, in
You
fact,
try
all that
something.
money that is spit out, all the money that is spit out, I might press all the buttons because
Yeah.
it was spitting
Yeah.
out a lot of money. I want to do
Yeah.
that. I want that again.
Yep.
I want it to be spitting out money again. In fact, I might get a chair. I might set up camp right next to this ATM, just
That-
in case. And
yeah.
yeah, and then when we talk about building rapport, I guess like yeah, the ATM built up. We built up a really good rapport.
Yeah. Now that
I
you
love
want to
that
be right
ATM.
next to that ATM, you want to be right
I,
next to it. That's exactly
I
the
want to
way
move right next to it. Yeah.
yeah, that's exactly the way I feel about those first 3, 4 sessions is like if I'm paying attention to this child, for example, and there's a constant flow of reinforcement, not just in what I'm offering, but maybe in my reactions, maybe in my responses to them. Then by that fourth or fifth session, I'm going to show up and they're going to want to be close. And then now, okay, we've got these things that this thing called a treatment plan that I think would be helpful to you and your parents agree. And now I'm going to direct some of those tasks a little bit, more poignantly and more accurately. But yeah,
Hmm.
I think that if you skip those steps, it's an uphill climb the rest of the time, especially if you're
It
dealing,
is. Yeah.
yeah, if
Yeah.
you're dealing with something that's challenging for the client already and something that they don't want to engage in because it's challenging, something that doesn't bring a whole lot of reinforcement or doesn't build a sense of efficacy without those, 4 or 5 sessions of that rapport building or that pairing or any number of terms that we use, which are mean something similar. Yeah, you're going to have a tougher time for sure. And I love that you started with the lab example. I love that translates so well.
Hmm. And to go back to Dan's example, it does matter who that person is. And like I guess that is one big takeaway when I was listening to Megan talk on your podcast. I was thinking about instructional control,
Mm,
and I was thinking about the study by Elizio. Some of the studies I might mention they're old ones, but they're really good
good
ones.
one.
Sure, sure.
And he did one of the best examples of instructional control. He did an experiment with humans, right? And then he was having them turn a lever to avoid losing a nickel. This is back in 1979,
Mm.
so it's a nickel was, I guess, that mattered. We wouldn't care about losing a
Got you
nickel
into the
today, but
movies.
A lot of
yeah.
candy, a lot of candy.
And then he gave them instructions, and sometimes the instructions were right, sometimes they were wrong, and it was really interesting. After they were wrong, then people just didn't pay attention to instructions anymore. But then, which I thought that was significant for practice because I'm like, here's evidence that like once you're wrong, and it results in that client,
Mm.
contacting an aversive or losing a reinforcer, then they might stop listening to you after that,
Yep.
right? And
Yeah.
I was thinking how important it is, and I've heard you guys talk about instructional control, but to see it and like whether someone's going to trust it, and then the other thing they showed the study is, would instructional control come under discriminative control? Could it be like, all right, the instructions on the purple paper versus the instruction on the yellow paper? And I imagine this would be like an analog to like receiving instructions from this teacher versus that teacher, right? And it does. It comes on. So it really depends on who's giving you the instruction. And this kind of makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because like attention, reinforcement in the form of attention is like that too. I want to be a good behavior scientist. And if I write a paper and my mom reads it and says, "Oh, you did such a great job," I wouldn't feel as fulfilled as if like the community of behavior scientists read my paper and were like, "Yeah, like, we want you to do a talk and do stuff like that. Great paper." Like you might, there's a lot of people who don't like the person in office right now. It might sound really cool to get like a medal from the president, but if you don't like that guy, getting the medal from this president might not be, rewarding to you. So It really can depend on the source. And I guess that's why building that report and really even the preparation in EAB, that's why we really should be taking that to the living room. We should be translating that as best as possible.
Yeah, I mean, it's where it all stems from, for sure. Like it's how we actively translate those particular experiments there to then toward a new application, right?
I think discriminative control is an interesting societal experiment right now because, there's always kind of been this idea of you listen to what law enforcement tells you to do, but now you have different law enforcement agencies actively combating, here in California, it's like, Newsom said he was going to use the National Guard kind of against ICE and vice versa. So you might, and without, getting political, just saying what's happening, like you might have two different law enforcement agencies or multiple tell you something and, traditionally I was under the instructional control of any law enforcement agency. Now I'm getting two different things. Now I have to do that discriminative piece that Scott talks about. And I don't know how well trained we are to know how to discriminate.
That goes to all sorts of layers. I don't know how far we want to get into this, but it is a really interesting topic, given what we're discussing. But anything from being presented a warrant or being told the reason why, or there's a lot of things that, to your point, Dan, are not active right now. And I have to say this before I forget, but as far as the current person in office, I think if you give him a medal, I believe is the more reinforcing behavior right now. So anyway. A dumb twist there for myself. Thank you, gentlemen. All right.
It's really funny. It's speaking about translation, though. You also had Mallory Quinn on, which I felt like those were the most understated episodes you had, right? Because her work was extremely influential, and publishing in Java is really hard, right? It's really hard. You got to be a really good technical writer, and that's what she is, right? But she made it seem like she wasn't. Right. And I just want to let you know she's full of crap, right? Because she is a really good writer. She published on dance in Java in 2015, 2016, 2017, and 2019. She published 4 articles. She looked at tag teach. She looked at public posting. She looked at graphic feedback. She looked at video feedback. She looked at modeling for and even token reinforcement for like a really young dancer, like a 6-year-old dancer wasn't getting it. So she added the token reinforcement. It was just, she just like looked at every angle of it and like, it was like produced these really great studies. And then we felt like really comfortable looking at her work because we felt like, all right, coming out of Miltonberger's camp and everything. Yeah. But then when we tried to extend from her work to golf, then we started running into issues, and some of the things we would do, we went back to our 7 dimensions and we're running into issues with the dimension of like effectiveness. What is effective? And ultimately, the issue was the thing that is scored in dance is movement. It is topography. So it makes a lot of sense to look really closely at topography. And this is what she was doing a lot of. And that would be the most important thing to shape. But in golf, the thing that's scored is how many shots it takes you to put the ball in the hole, right? That's what really matters. So you can have like a perfect looking swing, but if the effect on the ball is not reliable and accurate, like what good is it? And the thing you're shaping is like needs to be accuracy. It can't just be how you look swinging, because that doesn't always translate to accuracy.
Right.
And there's the question like, does a perfect swing result in perfect results? And the answer is no, it doesn't. You could have a perfect looking swing and the ball could go this way or that way or something like that. It really does come down to some fine motor movements. And is that going to be something that's captured in tag teach or in a task analysis? And I would say Probably not. And we had this problem with other research too. It wasn't just hers. Fogel et al. From 2010 and you et al. From 2020. I mean, they were like, taking pictures of the swing. You et al. Was like really a lot of biomechanical measures and stuff like that on the golf swing, and neither of them looked at like had a target and looked at accuracy to a target. It was just like, oh, can you hit the ball further? And this is really important. Like the target is really important. At least that's what I showed in my research. So we felt that there was like a lack of conceptual consistency, there, and I don't feel like it was any fault of hers, but one of the things we do in behavior analysis is we organize behavior by function and not topography. And our science really wasn't brought up that way. That we looked a lot at topography. Skinner never cared, if the rat was using his nose or his paw or his tail to press the lever. It was just all about switch closures. So we realized that, like, yeah, for us to be effective in this intervention for golfers, their accuracy has to get better. Then that's what we wanted to look at. We didn't want to look at the swing. And just so you know, like the equipment, for golf simulators that determines the trajectory of where the ball goes, that doesn't look at the swing either. Right. So you can't look at the swing and determine where the ball is going. That uses the club face angle, the speed of the club face and like the club face angle and impact. So it doesn't even look at the rest of your swing. You determine where the ball is going when you're on a simulator. So why would we be looking at the swing to determine where the ball is going if we're helping golfers?
No, but if you put all that together, and I imagine there's like for a drive, there's a certain amount of weight shifting, which wouldn't be important to a dance step in terms of how it looks, but now important to the golf swing. So do you think if you put that that perfect form along now with, the angle of the face of the club and your weight shift, all those three things together now might result in a longer distance, for example? So, I mean, so
Or maybe
somewhere
we
in there,
should.
the form has to matter, I guess, to some extent. I don't know.
Yeah, I get, if someone's all over the place, but I've seen all kinds of different forms of golf swings,
Yeah, yeah.
and then if you're going to say like, and I'm really most concerned, and this is one thing, the technology is different for acquisition than it is for refinement. So I'm most concerned with like, competing golfers and how to make people who can golf better at golf, like how to make people who are good better and the best, even better. And I'm thinking that we should be looking at more than just one swing. They want consistency, and that means over the results over several swings. So why are we going to break it down in one swing? And there's other people that do that. And honestly, there's other people that do that better than us. People who do kinematic and biomechanical measures and measure the swing and everything. And those places that do those intervention with golfers have come and gone because ultimately, is that the most useful thing in learning your swing? And sometimes maybe we should just be paying attention to the results and differential reinforcement of those results and consistency over like several shots and several holes and several rounds and things like that. That's what the golfers are looking for. They're using a lot of measures that we would use anyway. They're looking at their accuracy. They have all kinds of ways to measure their distance and their accuracy and all kinds of stuff like that. So we should just be using those metrics. I mean, the golfers aren't really looking at like their swing as much, the exact topography of the swing. I think if you're very consistent in your shooting, then does it really matter what your swing looks like?
Right.
If you're getting consistent results.
Let me see if I can understand this. So I kind of think about this in basketball. I know more about basketball than golf, and I think of like Reggie Miller, one of the greatest 3-point shooters of all time, had terrible form, but clearly it worked out for him because he made a lot of shots. But trying to relate it back to the golf piece, so initially you have to have some topography if you're going to teach a skill, right? You can't just throw.
For acquisition,
yeah,
I would
you have
say
to.
for acquisition, it's helpful. And for Valerie Quinn, it was helpful. Like she had young dancers who were just learning, But I guess for the competing golfers, it's like, what are we going to offer them? We're going to break their swing down again because their golf coach already did that, and their golf coach knows more about the swing than we do. And you know what? But the golf coach doesn't know more about schedules of reinforcement, differential reinforcement. They don't look at it that way. And these are our technologies that we can use for golfers to help golfers get better. And why are we trying to use like the technology from biomechanics? It doesn't really make as much sense.
So
Good
then
point.
acquisition topography is important because at least you have to have a basic, like, swinging it and weight transfer of hips and things. And then within there, I'm sure there can be all sorts of different deviations about how far the backswing is, how you transfer weight, whatever. But let's say golfer who is fairly accomplished or whatever comes to you and wants to improve their swing or be more consistent. Are you not going to then look at the topography of their swing and say, to be more consistent, you need to like fix your weight transfer, bring the
Hmm.
like how are you going to give them tangible? Because we can't just look at the function and say to be more consistent, like make the ball in the hole more. Don't we have to give them something a little more tangible?
Well, I like differential reinforcement,
Yeah.
especially like when you're talking about like, because you're not going to look at their form and get them, if they're shooting a ball 130 yards and they're like a yard off, get them to shoot it 131 yards by looking at their form. I don't see any way to tag that or
Hmm.
any way to make adjustments on your form when you're talking about like, very small, changes. But I really feel like the best way for us to do that is differential reinforcement. And I think we could do things like use like Bicker's equation to do percentile schedules and reinforce the top 80% of responses and things like that. And I think that would probably be more helpful than looking at their swing. There's a reason why that has not been successful at helping golfers. Like, because and I don't think we should go there and try to make it successful because honestly, our technology doesn't, it's not as good as some of the other technology I've seen. Like, what do we have? A task analysis? I mean, they're using like fit to a bio model. They got like these like little like these reflective balls all over a person, like all over the person, all over the club, right? And we're using a task analysis. So our technology looks primitive compared to theirs in measuring like form. And I don't think we should even go there with their technology because we have our own that's going to help golfers, and we should just use our technology to help golfers instead of borrowing from other sciences. But this is not just a problem that was in golf. There's other things that I had seen. Like for example, O'Neill and Miltenberger put something out on in 2020 on behavioral skills training for field hockey, and they use a task analysis. And they were also measuring, and this is what I think is interesting when you have the task analysis and you're measuring accuracy at the same time, right? So we saw like these increases in the task analysis. They're getting better on the task analysis. That's great. They're hitting 100%. Are they more accurate at shooting? No, they're not. Okay, so that's fine. They look better, but they want to be more accurate at shooting. Are we effective? Is that an effective intervention? I would say no. And it wasn't just that. Cladopoulos and McComas did basketball free throws, right? And they did task analysis too. And they were getting people up to 100% on the task analysis. And their free throws range from like 3 out of 10 to like 10 out of 10. So there's this big range. It wasn't like, it wasn't like, oh, we see them get better at the task analysis. And when we see them get equally as better at the task. It's not like that.
So what are we using? What like what are we doing to improve their percentages of free throws or goal scoring or making the ball in the hole? That's maybe what I'm
Yeah.
not understanding.
Oh, what are we doing to do it?
Yeah.
Well, they have this task analysis using behavioral skills training. So they're like going through each of the steps, working on form, and stuff like that. And I've seen studies that measured form and they measured accuracy side by side, like really measured it with like
Mhm.
biomechanics. And this was a study where they were looking at putting for golfers, and the form they were measuring is would the player be more pendulum like when they swing, but they also measured like how accurate they were. And this was a group study. They had a couple groups, and one group started one way first, the other group started the other way, and they both had improvements. And the group that was focusing on their form didn't improve as well at first than the group that was focusing on like just try to get the ball closer to the hole, right? That's what they're trying to do. Forget your form, just try to get the ball closer to the hole. And then they had switched, and the results kind of switched back. So it might even be like, what do you need at that time? And like, yeah, maybe practice and form, can help some. My thing is like, is that where our science came from? Is that where our science grew out of? Is that where like, can we go back to EAB and say we extended from EAB to get here? And I would say, no, we can't like go back to EAB and say we extended from EAB to get here. So why don't we just use the stuff we know from like our basic research and extend from that and like help golfers, which I feel like I have. I mean, I'm revising this article, but it looks like it's going to get picked up. So hopefully the golf stuff is going to come out soon. But I was preparing this week for you guys, so I want to make sure, like, I spent a good amount of time. All right, but that's all I want to. I know I was getting into behavior analysis, sports, and Mallory Quinn because I really respect her a lot. It's just really ironic that she was influential in that way, where like I'm thinking that I could just extend right from her research, which I think is great. But it just happened to be that the goals of golf and the goals of dance are just different, and it changes what is effective for the players or the dancers, right? And if their swing looked better but they weren't more accurate, that's not effective for a golfer. It's just not.
Right.
They want to be more accurate. But you guys had Matt Tapia on too.
Yes,
we did.
And he talked about ACT. And I thought Matt was great. It was really interesting. And he talked a lot about ACT, but then he talked about anxiety. And then he gave an operant analysis for anxiety. I thought that was really interesting. But I would ask you guys, is anxiety an operant or is it a respondent relation?
I chuckle, and then I have to interject as this concludes part 1 of our illuminating interview with Dr. Scott O'Donnell. Please do ensure you return for part 2 and
always analyze responsibly.
ABA on Tap is recorded live and unfiltered. We're done for today. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. See you next time.